Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here with us today. We know that folks are just joining in. We see the numbers continuing to increase, which is a great testament to the wonderful conversation that we'll be having today. So, thank you all so much for joining with us. My name is Brian Dershowitz. I am a senior director here at the Business Council for International Understanding. And we're so grateful to the Assistant Secretary, as well as our partner, Intrax, and all of you for joining with us for what will definitely be a fruitful discussion. Just a few reminders. Today's session is off the record and Chatham House rules. So we encourage and welcome a very open and honest conversation. We will, once we do get to the Q&A portion of today's program, please do use the raise your hand feature, and we will bring you over to be able to enable your audio and video so you can pose your comment or question. So again, thank you all so much for being here with us today for our program with Assistant Secretary Lee Satterfield from the Bureau for Educational and Cultural Affairs from the U.S. Department of State. I'd like to also take a moment to thank our partner Intrax for helping work with us on today's program. And with that, I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce Marcy Schneider, who is the president for Intrax, to make some opening remarks and introduce the Assistant Secretary. Marcy, over to you.
Okay, thank you so much, Brian. And good morning, afternoon, evening, everybody, depending where you are. Very nice to be here. Thanks to BCIU for organizing today's event. And thank you very much to Assistant Secretary Lee Satterfield for participating. As you just heard, my name is Marcy Schneider, and I'm the president of Intrax. And before I introduce the secretary, I would like to briefly acquaint you with Intrax. We were founded 40 years ago in San Francisco, as you can see from my bridge. And we have been providing cultural exchange experiences for children, students, young adults, families, organizations during all of those 40 years. And as we all know, these experiences inspire personal growth and cultural understanding, which is such an important and ever growing importance in our world. And although we are a public company, we have a long-standing and successful partnership with the Department of State, specifically with ECA. And Intrax is designated to offer the following. I'll briefly summarize the programs: Bridge USA programs, which utilize the J-1 visa. So the first one is the Au Pair program, which is a cultural exchange program connecting international au pairs with American families in need of childcare, and also giving the au pairs a firsthand experience of life in the United States and education during their program. Then we have a summer work travel program, which inspires young people from all over the world to come to the United States during their university breaks for short-term, 4-month generally work experiences throughout the U.S. And then we have a 12-month, similarly work travel program focused on Australia and New Zealand, which tend to be more hospitality-focused positions. We have an intern trainee program, our global internship program, which brings interns and trainees from all around the world to have the chance to live and work in a variety of companies and industries throughout the country. We have a camp counselor program, which brings young people from diverse countries to be camp counselors in positions across the United States. We also have a high school program called AYUSA. We have students from over 60 countries. They come and they live with host families, volunteer host families, I should add, and attend local high schools throughout the United States. And then lastly, we have a teacher program where we have international teachers coming to the U.S. and teaching in accredited public and private primary and secondary schools, K-12, in the United States. We are hopefully soon to be designated in a research scholar category, which will sponsor STEM-focused research programs at host organizations throughout the U.S. Our mission is very important to contribute to advances in science and technology by bringing the world's leading research scholars and industry experts together for cross-cultural learning and collaboration. As you can see, all of these programs promote public diplomacy and citizen ambassadors who go home to their home countries with a much more positive view of the United States. Many program alumni, in fact, go on to do really exciting things after returning to their home country, whether it's entrepreneurial or working in some form of government. In fact, the current Irish ambassador to the United States, Geraldine Byrne-Nason, is an alumni of the Bridge USA programs. And our very own IUSA alumni of 1996 is the outgoing Prime Minister of Moldova, Natalia Gavrilita. Intrax, like many companies and people across the globe, experienced numerous challenges during the pandemic, but we are so proud to have emerged stronger than ever. And we found ways during the pandemic to further strengthen and enhance our programs, as well as expand our virtual opportunities. Currently, we would say that the biggest challenges to our industry in the recovery post-COVID, visa availability in certain markets and certain program caps, but we really deeply appreciate the partnership with ECA and Consular Affairs to work with sponsor organizations like ourselves on these issues, which will only facilitate more people-to-people exchanges and encourage more diverse participants and countries, which are key to U.S. foreign policy goals, to come into the United States. I want to briefly mention the Alliance for International Exchange. We are actively involved with the Alliance in advocacy, education, and exposure of cultural exchange opportunities. As a board member for the Alliance for International Exchange, an association representing hundreds of organizations and companies comprising the educational and cultural exchange community to the United States and serving as their collective public policy voice. I work with the Alliance to help elevate the importance of exchange programs to congressional members, influence policy, contribute to data collection, and advance diplomatic understanding through strengthening international linkages with other countries through cultural and educational exchange programs. The collaborative work of the Alliance for International Exchange has been influential in encouraging greater transparency between consular operations and ECA programming during the pandemic. Additionally, the Alliance has been instrumental in determining economic impact and participant satisfaction tools to help collectively measure quality programming within the industry. Intrax is also a supporter of ECA's Early Career STEM Research Initiative. Through our intern and trainee designations, as well as our teacher program, we are actively working to increase the number of participants in STEM fields. And we also have in some of our programs, a focus particularly on women in STEM fields. In addition, we have applied to administer ECA's Global STEM Scholarship Fund, which seeks to increase the number of participants in STEM from underrepresented countries in Africa, East Asia, Pacific. Intrax is committed to advancing STEM opportunities in partnership with ECA and host organizations in the U.S., as these programs, as we all know, are vital to the continued growth and security interests of the United States. And with all of that, I would like to introduce the Honorable Lee Satterfield, who is Assistant Secretary of State for the Bureau of Education and Cultural Affairs, ECA, leading the State Department's global efforts to engage individuals through academic, cultural, professional, sports, and youth exchanges. Prior to taking on her role leading the department's international education exchange and engagement efforts, Lee was certainly no stranger to the exchanges world. On the State Department side, Lee was previously Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Academic Exchanges in ECA, as well as Deputy Chief of Protocol of the United States. She previously served in the Obama administration as Deputy Assistant Secretary of State in the Bureau of Education and Cultural Affairs, and prior to that, she was Deputy Chief of Protocol of the United States. In the Clinton administration, Ms. Satterfield held several senior positions, including Chief of Staff to Secretary-elect Herman at the Labor Department and Special Assistant to the President and Staff Director for the White House Office of Public Liaison. I know a number of people mentioned knowing Lee from her time as President and COO of Meridian, a very important member of the Alliance and a nonprofit center for diplomacy and a major ECA partner in implementing professional, cultural, and many exchange programs for diplomacy that strengthens engagement between the United States and the world. Lee has served the exchange community in many other ways as well, including as a member of the board of directors of the Alliance for International Exchange, of which I currently serve as vice chair. And I believe, if Lee doesn't mind us sharing, she's also an exchange student parent, as we heard. Right. That you have a son currently studying in Barcelona, which is
That's right.
Amazing. So it's always good to have that firsthand day-to-day knowledge from your own family as well. Lee is clearly knowledgeable and experienced in all facets of international education and exchange, and we're very proud to work with her and have her as a leader in our field, and really looking forward to hearing your comments today, Lee. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. I loved all that you had to say, and I'm glad that you took the time to share with me and all of us the wide variety of programming that you participate in for your company. And I just want to thank Intrax for all the great work. I don't know if everyone on the call knows, but Bridge USA, most do, but maybe not everyone does. Bridge USA is only very recently been branded Bridge USA, and also only recently included as alumni of the State Department programs, because it does not rely on federal funds to be administered. It's sort of been over the years in a separate category, and that changed for the better. And now the Bridge USA network is part of the broader network of alumni that are the best advocates for public diplomacy and democratic values and American values all over the world because of their unique experience. And now they're included in a way that our embassies and leaders on the US government side are relying on more and more. And Congress loves it because it's such good value to grow and strengthen our public diplomacy community. So Marcy, thank you for the work that you're doing on that front. And also just thanks to the Business Council for International Understanding for inviting me and for convening this group. And being able to have a conversation about the role of public diplomacy in foreign policy. It's so important. So thank you. On behalf of President Biden and Secretary Blinken, I'm really honored to be here today to share with you a little bit about our priorities and view of public diplomacy in a broader sense. You know, in a world where change is constant, especially on the international stage, public diplomacy and exchanges is a strategic imperative. That bottom line, and it matters now more than ever before. President Biden asserted in our national security strategy, that's the United States foreign policy roadmap, that a nation's power springs from its people. And indeed it does. And I think everyone on this call knows that really well, but I'll take it a step further. Every aspect of US foreign policy, defense, diplomacy, development, have an underlying reliance on people-to-people engagement. And historically, we've witnessed examples of this: the fall of the Berlin Wall, the end of apartheid, the AIDS epidemic, the Arab Spring, natural disasters. Each of these events prove progress is not possible without the trust and support of people, both at home and abroad. And this brings people-to-people diplomacy front and center, whether it's South Africans standing up to apartheid, Tunisians organizing social media platforms, all at the heart of these movements. People came together armed with hope, know-how, and the simple belief in peace and prosperity for all. And that changed the trajectory of history. And I think that's important for us to remember. Today, within the president's national security strategy, there are key components of that drive that drive action collectively through policy and public diplomacy every single day, strengthening democracy, promoting global economic stability, and competing with those actors and nations who are in direct conflict with our American values. The National Security Strategy states, as we create the conditions for our people to thrive, we also continue to make America the destination of choice for talent around the world. That's where the work that we do together to support international student mobility and international education takes center stage. I hope you're all familiar with the Open Doors report. And in 2022, the report outlined that the United States remains the top destination for international students globally. But we can't rest on our laurels. We're seeing increased competition from all over the world, major investments being made from those who are in direct conflict with American values, but also many of our allies. And we want to show that America is open for business and that we encourage the best and the brightest to come to the United States to study. International student mobility infuses an additional $32 billion into the American economy and supports nearly 300,000 American jobs. International education is one of the top 10 exports. And we recognize and appreciate the value international students bring to classrooms and campuses across all of our communities. That's why we've doubled down to increase our efforts in the program called Education USA. That's our global advising network that supports bringing international students to the United States. And that's all, again, linked back to the national security strategy. It's been one of my top priorities to make sure that as we make decisions on budget and priorities, that everything we do has a direct linkage back to the president's national security strategy, and including more international students and giving them the ability to study in the United States is definitely a part of that. But that's only half the equation. We recognize the impact that COVID-19 had on our American students. And we're working very closely with U.S. colleges and universities to increase the number of Americans who study abroad, aiming to increase even the pre-pandemic levels of Americans who are able to study abroad. And students with limited financial means and first-generation college students, community college students, often feel that study abroad is out of reach, and it shouldn't be. As study abroad reemerges, we're going to ensure that study abroad becomes even more accessible to every student who's seeking that life-changing opportunity. We're prioritizing reaching out to a broader network of individuals within the United States to diversify that field of students who have the opportunity to study. And we're increasing the numbers, some of the budget numbers for students of a variety of backgrounds to get scholarships to study abroad in one of our prestigious programs called the Gilman Scholars Program. That's for Pell Grant recipients. The Gilman program allows them to study abroad on that program, and we're very, very proud of that. And as Marcy mentioned, as a testament to my belief that we want more students studying abroad, I do have my youngest child. He's not a child anymore, he's 21, but he's doing a junior year semester actually in Barcelona, and he wraps up. I think he's in exams right now, as a matter of fact. I think his last day is the end of this week. And it went so quickly. And it is interesting to see as a parent what it's like to have someone in your family participate in exchange. I've been in and around this field for most of my career, as Marcy pointed out, a long time. And it is a different perspective having your own child on an exchange. So I think that is an added layer of what I think that I do bring to the table, which is important. So thank you, Marcy, for pointing out that my son Connor is studying abroad. I wanted to also mention within the national security strategy, the president outlines how COVAX, the global effort to deploy vaccines across the world, is supporting the global health solutions. And through our J1 exchange visitor programs, Bridge USA, we bring international researchers together with our American counterparts in the United States to pursue a cure, not a career, although it could help build a career, a cure for COVID-19. And that's just an example of a very specific way that we're addressing big global challenges around the world. Also, when the president speaks out against the war in Russia, in Ukraine, the Russians' brutal effort to destroy Ukraine, in fact, that's when our cultural heritage efforts come to the forefront. Far from the headlines of tanks and fighter jets is Russia's destruction of Ukrainian cultural heritage and identity. And we're doing all we can to help preserve and protect these cultural sites and artifacts. We're spearheading this effort through our recently launched Ukrainian Cultural Heritage Response Initiative. And it sends a strong signal, not only to the Kremlin, but to transnational criminal organizations, traffickers, and corrupt dealers, that we will stand up against those who aim to damage, destroy, or steal cultural heritage around the world. Front and center to the national security strategy is the reality that in this post-Cold War posture, as a complement to our broader defense and development work around the world, our public diplomacy footprint continues to modernize and grow around the world. Hopefully you are aware of our nearly 700 American spaces outfitted across the globe. So the United States can be present not just as a transactional moment in time, but for the long haul. The idea of American spaces is that we want to be present in communities around the world and meet the people where they are. Many of you know, I hope, American spaces are open access learning and gathering places around the world that promote interaction between the local communities and the United States. Our Education USA advising centers that I mentioned earlier in my remarks are often located there and help recruit and support international students to study in the United States. So I've outlined a few of our key priorities: cultural heritage, American spaces, education, and global health, as they pertain to the national security strategy. But you may have noticed that I didn't carve out and highlight diversity, equity, and inclusion and accessibility. And that's because it is an overarching priority of all that we do at ECA. And we embed DEIA into our program design and program implementation because representation matters. And if people here at home and abroad can see it, they can surely believe it. And the Biden administration will continue to embed DEIA into all of our foreign policy efforts to ensure that it lasts well beyond a term in office or a trend or a news cycle. Secretary Blinken says our diversity is one of our greatest strengths, and I agree, and we'll continue to leverage DEIA in everything that we do. So I'll end on one last point, and it is probably the most important point. Particularly, I know there are many of you on this call who are strong partners of ECA and help implement many of the programs that we run. And that is our alumni network. For more than 80 years, nearly 2 million people, including over 500,000 Americans, have participated in U.S.-sponsored or supported exchanges. And our exchange alumni, as most know on this call, go on to become leaders in government, in business, or in civil society, and are our strongest partners around the world in addressing big global challenges that we all face. And there's a stat that we love to throw out there and to humble brag, if I may, that nearly 700 current or former heads of state and government are part of our exchange alumni network. And I hear from our ambassadors serving all around the world all the time, including just yesterday, that often when they are in conversations with government officials trying to negotiate something, a trade agreement or a bilateral cooperation in any way, often if a leader has been on one of the ECA exchange programs, particularly our IVLP program, they are often the strongest allies and advocates for partnerships and bilateral agreements. And so it has a multiplier effect that we see time and time again. I am back at ECA after having been here almost a decade ago. And I would say that the biggest change I've seen, and people ask me that all the time, has been in our efforts toward our alumni engagement, whether it's through including the Bridge USA alumni, like I talked about at the beginning, or it's creating a Salesforce platform where we can better engage our alumni, to giving out small grants that alumni can apply for to carry out really interesting projects in their local communities. These are all examples of strengthening our alumni engagement and creating that network of individuals that all have shared values and want to come together on important global issues to solve for the greater good. And I think that's something that we all believe in, or you wouldn't be on this call. And I think we want to continue to leverage those networks and that community of people to achieve better results for not only the United States, but for everyone around the world that has shared values. And I'll close by saying a nation's power does spring from its people, as the president says, and people-to-people diplomacy is the nucleus of not just U.S. foreign policy, but the international community. And public diplomacy creates impact beyond the confines of government, a news story, or a political cycle. And we do meet people where they are, in classrooms, in concert halls, in communities and countries worldwide, to bridge divides and create lasting relationships that use education and culture and everything in between as a springboard for what's next. It's a business partnership, a global health discovery, a joint peace plan, and so much more. I'm incredibly hopeful, and I thank you all for allowing me a few minutes to speak to you. And I look forward to a conversation with questions. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Assistant Secretary. Just again, as a reminder, please do raise your hand for questions and comments, and we'll gladly add you into the queue. Assistant Secretary, thank you so much for those comments. I only had the ability to do study abroad when I was in grad school, and it was such a wonderful experience. So it's great to hear about all the work that you were doing. The one request I would have for you is to openly brag. I don't think there's a need to humble brag about the wonderful outcomes of the programs. So with that, we'll open up the Q&A, and we'll start with Kristen Sinclair, the Vice President for Work Travel for Intrax. Kristen, over to you.
Thank you, Assistant Secretary Satterfield. It's actually Caitlin, but Kristen was really close, Brian.
I'm so sorry.
You're good. So you talked about the importance of alumni, and our question is, the Bridge USA's alumni program has obviously been growing in recent years. What are a few examples of high-profile stories that can demonstrate the power of exchange programs?
Am I muted? That's a great question. I'll try to think of a couple of examples off the top of my head. First of all, there are dozens and dozens and dozens of amazing profiles of individuals who've gone on to do amazing things in their community when they return from a program and return back home. And we try to highlight those on our website and on social media platforms. If anyone on this call has examples of amazing work that's being done from an exchange participant when they get back home, and you've not seen it highlighted, please share with us that information so that we can highlight those stories. I try to meet with alumni everywhere I travel, and I have been so impressed, no offense to those who are on federally funded programs, but when I talk to Bridge USA alumni, they're often the ones who have the greatest impact because they have an entrepreneurial sense, because they've come out and sought and made available and made the effort to be involved in Bridge USA kinds of programs. When I was in Brazil, there was a group of young women who'd been on the au pair program, and what they were doing to give back in their community was incredible. One woman started a blog and has, I wish, if I can remember her name, I'll put it, or if anybody's on from my staff and can remember her name and put it in the chat. She has 1 million followers on social media and started a blog and often talks about her experience in the United States from a personal level. And she ends up having a pretty significant impact in her community when she went back home. Another high profile example that I'm remembering is through one of the alumni networks, a group of Bridge USA Summer Work Travel alumni created a network in Lithuania. And once the war in Ukraine was started by the Russians, they went about creating a network for displaced Ukrainians that were in Lithuania. And they have hundreds of students who are part of a school community now, and they're employing, I think, probably 20, 25 mothers as part of a school and an effort to engage that community that have been displaced from Ukraine. I think that's probably a really strong example of the value of that they take back home and can create.
Thank you. Agreed.
Great. Thank you so much, Caitlin. Any follow-up question or comment?
Nope. Thank you.
All right, wonderful. Well, thank you so much. We will go Nancy from ETS, and then following Nancy, we'll go to Nakia from the University of Illinois. So Nancy, over to you.
Great. Thanks, Brian. And Assistant Secretary, thank you so much for, all your years working and your commitment to this issue. I'm sure you're familiar with ETS, and our assessments help facilitate many international students being able to have these experiences and then produce all of those wonderful contributions that you mentioned. ETS has, we've been concerned over the last few years in seeing the US's market share drop in terms of other countries' ability to recruit international students. And I think one difference between the US and other countries is that many other countries have developed coordinated national strategies to address this. We've brought together recently 25 organizations that are really involved in this, including the President's Alliance and NAFSA and IIE and actually Marine. Marianne Craven was at this meeting and really valued her participation. And we hatched a plan to try and double the number of international students by 2030, the international students coming to the U.S. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on how the U.S. can, any actions that the U.S. government can take as a whole to try and increase the number of international students coming to our country. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. And I'm sorry that I missed the opportunity to be included in that. And Marianne did talk to me about her participation in that afterwards. So I was quite happy to hear that she was able to be a part of that discussion. I'll mention a couple things that we've done so far that I think we need to build on, and then look at, I'll be very interested to see and read the report that you're talking about that looks to double by what, 3030? Is that what you said?
2030, yes.
2030, I meant 2030, obviously. 2030. I'll be interested to see that. A couple of things. I think one, that our Consular Affairs Office has prioritized student visas. So I think that's key. When I travel all around the world and I talk to students who are interested in coming to the United States, they are often get scared about the process because there are long wait times and they hear that they can't get appointments and all the rest that comes with that. But we have prioritized student visas as part of that process. So that's helpful. So we're trying to do all we can to send signals around the world that the United States, after this pandemic experience, is open for business, and that we're prioritizing student visas and we want people to come and be a part of studying in the United States. I've also made a significant effort to encourage U.S. universities and colleges to create direct partnerships with universities and colleges around the world. For example, I was just in Greece with a delegation led by IIE of US colleges and universities to go to Greece and create their own independent relationships with the public sector universities in Greece. And that was supported by the Minister of Education and encouraged by the Prime Minister. So I think when you can get that level of participation and elevation, and then bring a group of U.S. Schools there to then create the relationship. So we're not even in the middle of that. We're more facilitating this relationship so that they can create it directly. So I sort of see the role of the U.S. government, and particularly ECA, as a facilitator of that direct linkage. And then we need to do more across agency. I think when the secretary, when I first started, and you were probably a part of this, when they signed the joint statement that included Department of Education, Department of State, and Commerce, in talking about this encouragement of international study in the United States, those efforts go a long way. And we're continuing to think about what we might do more in the interagency process to highlight and encourage international study in the United States. I think we also need to do a better job getting the story out about how international students enhance communities around the United States in ways that we've got to counter this idea that they're taking spots, or that there's some negative connotation to having international students in the classroom and in communities. They're often the ones volunteering and understanding the role of volunteerism. They're out in the communities. American students who either can't participate in study abroad or don't have the time to, can experience another culture through someone in their classroom that is from somewhere else. I know when my son Connor applied for Barcelona, a number of his friends are in the engineering school. and they don't have the opportunity to take a semester off to go somewhere else. They have to stay at their school to get their credits. Well, having someone in their community from another country gives them an experience that's local. And I think we can do a better job telling that story and encouraging why that's so important for Americans and for American colleges and universities. So thank you for that question. And thank you for your involvement in doing all that you can do to help us increase that number.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks, Nancy.
Great. Thank you so much, Nancy. Nikhil, we'll go over to you. We then have a question that came on into the chat, and then a few more folks in the queue. So, Nikhil, over to you.
Thank you, Assistant Secretary, for your address and your human-centered approach to international exchange. Many of the things that you said really resonated with me. I direct a program called the LAS Global Leaders Program at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. And one thing we like to impress upon our students is human-centered design and how to design solutions with communities as opposed to for them. So when you spoke about people-to-people engagement and involving the locals in the work that you're doing, that really resonated with me. And I wanted to know if you could share more about how do you achieve that effort of designing and strategizing with communities as opposed to for them?
Great question. And thank you for sharing your approach and what you do locally with your students and impressing upon that philosophy, I guess. We do it through a number of ways. I think our alumni engagement help us to think about design of programs that sort of this idea, and I said a couple of times, meet people where they are. What is going to resonate with a community or with a group of people? And I'm hearing a lot more about upskilling and how we can infuse. ECA's bread and butter is building mutual understanding between the people in the United States and people around the world. That is our mandate. That is why we get money from Congress. That is important. It will always be important. But now we're trying to think about what are the layers that get to more of what is a driving issue for people: jobs, skills, learning English. So we're talking to people, and again, often through our alumni networks or through embassies where communities are, or through our American spaces where people come just in from out on the neighborhood to come and participate in a program. And we're just asking and talking to people and building what we think people care about and what will create a program that is of interest. I'll give you a more sharp's not the right word, but a more strategic sort of slice at using one of our platforms to what we're hearing people are looking for. In Brazil, there was an interest in addressing climate issues in and around the Amazon and trying to look at the troubles that they're facing with deforestation. So we created a Fulbright program to ask a U.S. scientist and a Brazilian scientist to chair a working group, and invited scientists from every country that bordered the Amazon to come together and look at these issues over the next 6 months or year. And we announced that in Brazil a couple of weeks ago. So we're constantly reacting to what we see is a need in a community that they care about and want to address, and allows the United States to also be a part of it. And the partnership that you said is that is a strength and an American value. That is what we lean into in all of our programs all around the world. And when I talk to communities, when I travel, that's what I say about what America brings. It is absolutely partnership models, period. And that it's not lecturing or saying that our way is the right way. And we're often, the United States, we're often learning from our exchange participants as well about ways to do things better or to strengthen it or a different way to view it. That's the beauty of an exchange. That's the purpose of an exchange. I hope that answered your question. Thank you for what you do.
Yes, thank you.
Great. Thank you so. Thank you so much. We have a question in the chat, and then we will go over to Sean from P&G, as well as then Tanya from Howard University. And as I know, everyone here has been in contact with Maggie Chambers, who's done such a phenomenal job in getting us to today's program. And I know Maggie is thrilled, Tanya, for your question as an alumnus of Howard. So I'll just, Assistant Secretary, read you this question, then we'll go to Sean and to Tanya. So the question that we have is, how do you think technology and internet can support international studies, including use of COIL, remote internships, and online courses? Moreover, how can funding, Gilman and beyond, reach these innovative programs as they tend to currently stick to in-person programming only?
Okay, let me break that down. First of all, thank you for being here, those from Howard. I was recently on the campus with the Secretary of State when he hosted the foreign minister from India, and we had a lovely discussion with a group of students who were on a number of the ECA programs on the campus there. I think it was a couple of months ago, but I loved my time on the campus. And thank you for being here today. Online, I think I was going to say this in my remarks, and then I didn't want to talk too much. I wanted to get to questions, so I left it out. But, all of us went through such a horrible time at the height of the pandemic, where everything from our people-to-people diplomacy programs had to go virtual, except for a handful of those programs that were year-long academic exchange, like Fulbright, where students were actually in U.S. universities and colleges where they could stay in a long-term and be sort of part of a program like every other American student was, and what they went through during that year. Most of all of our other programs went to virtual. And I think we learned so much from that experience. Now that we're sort of coming into a different phase of that, I think we need to look at the lessons learned, those successes that we had as part of that program, and incorporating them into the future. A couple of examples of, I think, ways that we did it really successfully and I want to keep. When we used to recruit within the United States to get students on Fulbright, Gilman, Critical Language Scholarship Program, hopefully you guys know about all these, it required in-person traveling to somewhere, being on a campus, trying to do things in a very traditional way. Then we started doing things virtual, and then we were able to reach broader audiences from all around the United States in communities who we hadn't reached before, diverse communities in small and rural places all across the United States, particularly in the middle of the country, where we were, what we're trying to do is not just have everyone from the East Coast and the West Coast be participants, but be able to have a more regional selection as well. And those are often those who don't know as much about the programs and opportunity. And through the virtual work, we doubled the number of people that we were telling about the programs and the work. So I think that's an example of using technology and integrating in a way that we need to keep. I'll mention one more example because I know there's another question, and I see Ian is telling me that I've got to wrap at exactly 2. So the one other example of a program that was started during COVID and is continuing to thrive and grow is a program called the Academy of Women Entrepreneurs. And that is a program for women all around the globe. And the training model for that program was a platform created by Arizona State University. And it is an entrepreneurship training model that they give to these women, all virtual. And so that entire work was going virtual. And the more stories I hear about the impact of that program, the more I am incredibly impressed. In fact, it's had such success that when Vice President Harris traveled to Africa a month ago, she announced the partnership with Arizona State University as part of an example of a model of how we can use technology to do skills, this upskilling thing that I was talking about earlier, and how we can bring that to the forefront and create economic opportunity, particularly for women around the globe. And that's an example of how we can do more in the technology space. And I'm hopeful that that platform will soon be available, not just in that program, but in our spaces all around the United States. So I see someone from P&G that popped on the screen and has a question, but I'll just say this because looking at him reminds me, private sector engagement in our programs is critical. One thing that I'm incredibly focused on is finding opportunities for the private sector to be a partner in all of our public diplomacy efforts. I used Arizona as an example, but we partner with Howard. We partner with many, many, many U.S. universities and colleges all across the country. And we also do with private sector. We just announced a partnership with Google where we're doing workforce training and digital literacy programs at the American Spaces in Vietnam and Indonesia. A great example of a win-win where we want U.S. companies to engage with us and invest in ways that bring about all that we're trying to bring about in public diplomacy programs. And it's about upskilling, democracy, values, American values, all part of what, where companies and the U.S. government can align on objectives and work together to achieve those objectives. So, Sean, do you have a question? Seeing you pop up made me think of private sector.
No, thank you very much, Ambassador. And I'll make a quick comment and then allow them to recognize somebody else before you have to go. And just say that thank you for your service. And, I want to make sure and encourage you to be a part of the really strategic planning process. A couple of things that I see as opportunities. One, the State Department's working on a Central Asian strategy and how exchange programs wrap into the C5+1 strategy of the U.S. to engage Central Asia. As a company operating there, we just think like exchange programs help those countries because Uzbekistan is trying to accede to the WTO. And you can look at Kazakhstan's success in acceding to the WTO and realize that a lot of the technocrats that they have in their country were actually trained in the United States and the EU. And then I was in a trade association meeting yesterday where I became aware that there are maybe only 300 Americans in China on student visas now. And there are maybe 300,000 Chinese in the United States. And we absolutely need to increase the number of Americans that are going to China to help stabilize the relationship in ways for the long term in terms of cross-cultural understanding. And so I just, that number just jumped out at me, 300 versus 300,000. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's gotten so bad. And so I want to root you on and support you and connect you to some sort of, encourage you to connect to a strategic planning process so that your voice is really heard, even in that U.S.-China relationship. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. I couldn't agree with you more. I'm all about continuing to have exchange opportunities with everyone, including China. We still do programming. that number is significantly decreased because China shut down during the pandemic and didn't allow people to come in and participate at the levels that they had pre-pandemic. So that's been, unfortunately, a outcome of what happened during COVID and that country's decision to not allow people to come in. So I'm all about building that up. If you can, I think I do give that message, but I think if the private sector can give that message to Congress, to the community, to others, to talk about why it's so important to have that people-to-people engagement, particularly with China, I think is important, because I think people somehow view our competition with China as meaning that we shouldn't be engaged. And I actually think it's the opposite, as you so perfectly described. Competition with China means engage, find ways to collaborate, find ways to work together, find ways that we can have shared interests. And we have over the years, and we need to build that back up again, in my opinion. So thanks for that point, and please make it far and wide, I will as well. Do we have time for one more? Are we done, Brian?
Right at the top of the hour. Tanya, if you can make it very brief, we certainly welcome you to make comments. Ed Kemp from your team, Assistant Secretary, has indicated that he's more than happy to answer any questions as a follow-up. So for anyone that has any follow-ups, please reach out to Maggie and she can put you in touch with Ed. Again, thank you so much to Marcy and the team at Intrax, Assistant Secretary. Thank you so much. Tanya, we'll go to you quickly, Assistant Secretary, your response, and then we will conclude.
Thank you. Really quickly, my name is Tania Hope. I'm the director of the Ralph J. Bunche International Affairs Center at Howard. And I just wanted to point out, for the sake of also those in the private sector who are on this call, IIE recently shared data with us that shows that historically Black colleges and universities are responsible for sending 94% of all Black and African American students that study abroad. They're coming from HBCUs as opposed to PWIs. And I'm wondering if there are any efforts around or being discussed, since we are talking about workforce development here, around internships abroad that would marry the international experience or study abroad for students with an internship experience. And how might the State Department better support HBCUs, since we seem to be doing the heavy lifting in terms of getting Black and African American students abroad, to support more efforts in that vein?
So let's see. The idea for internships overseas as a part of an exchange, I can't think of any. And I'm not sure if that's been something that has been considered. I will find out and look into it. It's a really great idea, particularly to the point that I think you're making, which is often it becomes very difficult to go for a year or a semester when you can't afford to do it. So you're over there spending time away where you either have family to take care of in the United States or need to have a job during school to support. So I think that's something that we should absolutely look at. I had not heard that stat from IIE about the number of that's coming from HBCUs. That's fascinating. Well done, you. I will mention that, not that this is what you're talking about, but I think it's another example of where we're trying to be as inclusive and broad brush as we possibly can. ECA led the way in renewing a very old and outdated MOU with the Hispanic Association of Colleges and Universities a couple of months ago. And we talked about things like what you're talking about, internship opportunities, reaching students from Hispanic serving institutions to be able to make sure they know more about the opportunity to study abroad and to have international students hosted in HSIs. I think when we look across the board at the numbers and the where we're seeing where we need to make increased efforts, it was definitely within Hispanic serving institutions. And so that's been something that we were looking at doing. And then in this past year's budget, we also put more funding toward HBCUs to grow the number of HBCU students who can participate. And I'm blanking on what the number was exactly at this moment, but we can provide that to you. But I love the idea of an internship in a global exchange, and I'll look into that with my academic team. Thank you for your question.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
No, thank you so much. And I know we are in overtime, so thank you for everyone still with us today. Again, thank you so much, Assistant Secretary. This has been an absolutely phenomenal conversation. Thank you to Marcy and the team at Intrax. We know you're already a few minutes late for some meetings, so we don't want to continue to hold you up. Just send our apologies. We'll gladly take the blame. Again, thank you all so much for being here. If you have any questions or follow-ups, or please do reach out to Maggie. She can certainly help make those connections. Thank you, everyone, and we look forward to regrouping very shortly. Have a great rest of your day.
Bye-bye.